A handsome stranger broke into my Airbnb, claiming it was his. Now I'm stuck, sharing a bed with him. I woke up to the sound of something smashing. My heart jumped into my throat and I shot upright in bed. The wind was howling outside, but that noise, it was way too loud to be just the storm. Someone was breaking in. I fumbled around in the dark, heart hammering in my chest as I tried to make sense of what was happening. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, thankfully the fireplace poker, gripping it like I'd seen in every action movie ever. If someone was coming through that door, I was ready. I crept out of the bedroom, my breath shallow at first. The living room was cold and the dim light from the fireplace barely lit the place. Then I saw him, a guy, soaked through like he'd just walked in from a blizzard. He was standing in the doorway, looking at me like I was the one who had broken in. His hair was plastered to his forehead and he was shivering, but still, damn. He was ridiculously handsome. Blonde, green eyes, the kind of look that made you forget you were holding a weapon. What the hell? I muttered, my grip tightening on the poker. The guy looked just as shocked as I felt. He looked me up and down, eyes narrowing. This is my cabin. What the hell are you doing here? I blinked. What? No, this is my cabin. I rented it. I have the booking confirmation right here, I said, pulling up my phone like I'd just discovered a magic weapon. The guy raised an eyebrow, his soaked clothes dripping onto the floor. Funny, he said. I've got the same confirmation. He pulled out his phone, waving it in my face like he was showing me a prize. See? I stared at his screen, trying to make sense of it. It was the same damn confirmation I had. Same cabin, same dates. My brain wasn't computing. This doesn't make any sense, I said, voice tight. I was still holding the poker, unsure whether to swing it or use it as a bargaining chip. Did they double book us or something? He shrugged, looking completely unfazed despite the fact that his teeth were chattering. Guess we'll have to figure it out. But if you don't mind, I'd really like to not freeze to death. I blinked at him. What the hell was happening? A few minutes later. I didn't know what the hell was going on, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let some guy waltz into my cabin like he owned the place. I kept the poker tight in my grip and stepped over, not sure if I was going to defend myself or just knock him out cold. Listen, buddy, I don't care who you think you are, this is my place, I said, my voice more forceful than I felt. I rented it through the app, I've got a confirmation right here. He shook his head, still shivering but not backing down. No way. I rented this place, same confirmation, this is my cabin and you must have made a mistake. I narrowed my eyes. You think I'm the one who made the mistake? There's no way I'm getting kicked out of my own rental. I'm not saying you're getting kicked out, but it's clear we both think this is ours. He pointed to his phone again, holding it up like it was some kind of magic trick. I swear we have the same dates, the same cabin. I glanced at it, and of course, it looked exactly like mine. Same dates, same cabin, the same confirmation. I ran a hand through my hair. This wasn't happening. Okay, fine. You've got the same booking, so what? That doesn't explain why you're... Suddenly he interrupted, his voice a little calmer now, but still pissed. Look, the storm's getting worse, and I can't leave. You can't leave, so we're stuck here. I'm not sleeping outside, I'm just asking for some basic space to stay warm. My teeth gritted. Fine, you stay, but you're not sleeping in my bed. That's non-negotiable. He sighed, looking at me like I was being the unreasonable one. Well, there's only one bed. I froze. I know. I guess we're sharing it then. A few hours later. I stared at the bed like it was some kind of trap. There was no way around it. One bed, two people. I had to share it with him. And the worst part? I was actually kind of nervous. We both stood there, awkwardly silent for a moment, as if the bed might suddenly grow a second one. I'll take the edge, he said, like that was supposed to make this less uncomfortable. He grabbed the blankets and pulled them over to his side, but there was no avoiding the fact that we were way too close. I climbed in, trying not to make a big deal of it. My back stiffened, and I just stared at the ceiling, feeling a little ridiculous. I could feel the heat coming off of him, even though we were barely touching. His breathing was steady, but I swear I could feel it like a thrum in my chest. For a second, I just lay there, trying not to focus on the fact that he was inches away. But then he shifted, just a little, enough to make me tense up. "Sorry," he muttered, voice low. "It's fine," I said, but my heart was racing. I couldn't remember the last time I was this close to someone, let alone someone like him. His blonde hair, the way his green eyes kept glancing at me when he thought I wasn't looking. It was hard to ignore. My stomach twisted in a weird way, not unpleasant, but confusing. I cleared my throat. "This is ridiculous," I muttered, trying to brush it off. He just chuckled softly, and I could feel the tension easing slightly. But it didn't stop my mind from wandering. We lay there, too aware of each other, the silence stretching longer than either of us probably wanted. The next morning. The morning light barely filtered through the curtains, but I could already feel the tension from last night creeping into the day. Roman had already moved around the cabin, making himself at home like he owned the place. It was weird how easily he slipped into this calm, easygoing vibe. Me? I just wanted to get through this without losing my cool. We both finally managed to get a signal after hours of waiting, and when the confirmation came through that it was double booking, I couldn't believe it. This was officially the worst. Roman, on the other hand, seemed to take it in stride. He shrugged and grinned. "Guess we're stuck together, huh?" He said it was like some kind of a challenge, a little too pleased about the whole situation. I, however, was less than thrilled. "Yeah, no kidding," I grumbled. I shot him a glare before turning back to my phone, trying to ignore how annoyingly good-looking he looked with that smirk on his face. He didn't seem to mind the closeness, almost as if he found it amusing. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about how the hell I was going to survive another day, and share a cabin with him. "Relax, man," Roman said, tossing a piece of toast at his mouth as he leaned against the counter. "We're in the middle of a storm. What's the worst that could happen? It's kind of like a forced vacation." I rolled my eyes, forced being the key word. But despite myself, I was already starting to notice little things. His laughter, his casual attitude, it was starting to grate on my nerves, and yet I couldn't fully dismiss how it kept pulling me in. A few hours later. The next few hours weren't much better. The storm was still raging outside, trapping us inside this tiny cabin. We ended up cooking breakfast together, which felt way too personal for my taste. I stayed quiet, chopping vegetables in a corner of the kitchen, trying to ignore the way Roman moved around the space like it was his own house. He was making conversation like it was the most natural thing in the world. "So what do you do?" he asked, tossing a piece of bacon into the pan with a flick of his wrist. I didn't look at him. "Nothing exciting," I muttered. "I work in marketing." "Marketing, huh?" He leaned against the counter, casually flipping a pancake. "I bet you have to sell people stuff they don't even need." I shot him a side eye. "Something like that." He smirked, obviously enjoying pushing my buttons. "I can't imagine that's a fun job, but hey, it's gotta pay the bills, right?" "Yeah, it pays fine," I snapped, not even sure why I was getting irritated. Maybe it was the way he seemed so laid back while I was over here boiling with frustration. But as he passed me the plate of pancakes, our fingers brushed. Just a quick touch, but enough to make my heart stutter for a second. I forced my eyes down, focusing on the food. "Here," Roman said, his tone softer. "Eat. We're gonna be here for a while." I nodded, swallowing hard, trying to ignore the strange pull I felt toward him. Later that night. By the time dinner rolled around, I was ready to strangle someone. The tension between us was building, not from the cabin or the storm, but from something else, something that I refused to acknowledge. Roman was still being annoyingly cool, moving around the kitchen like he was the one in charge, while I stayed back and tried to keep my distance. "Dude, relax," Roman said as he handed me a glass of wine. "You're acting like I'm the one who's making this awkward." I took the glass, glaring at him. "You're the one acting like we're on some romantic getaway." Roman raised an eyebrow, a small chuckle escaping his lips. I never said that, but you're the one who's clearly uncomfortable. I was about to snap back at him when he leaned in closer, just slightly, and I could smell the damn cologne he wore. It was too much, too close. "It's just you and me here, Andrew," he said, voice low. "No reason to keep fighting this, yeah?" I could feel my face heat up, but I wasn't about to let him win. "I'm not fighting anything," I muttered. But damn, I was. Every time he smiled or touched me, every time he laughed, it was like something was shifting in the air, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep pretending it didn't affect me. Roman leaned back, looking satisfied with my reaction. "Sure you're not," he said, grinning like he knew exactly what he was doing. I clenched my jaw, trying to fight it, but I could feel the tension between us getting harder to ignore with every passing minute. 2 days later. It started small, just a few moments here and there. At first, I was determined to keep my distance from Roman. He was still annoying as hell, always joking around, always too relaxed, but there were moments when I couldn't help but laugh. Like when he tried to make pancakes but ended up with a kitchen disaster that we both had to clean up. "You sure this isn't a cooking show gone wrong?" I said, wiping flour off my hands as he scrambled to fix the mess. Roman grinned, shaking his head. "If it is, I'm winning. Just wait till you try this masterpiece." He held up a pancake that looked more like a blob than food, and I had to laugh to spite myself. "Yeah, okay, if I die from food poisoning, I'm blaming you," I shot back, trying to keep it casual, but something about the way he grinned at me made it hard to stay annoyed. We ended up eating the lumpy pancakes anyway, both of us pretending they didn't taste like rubber. After that, we spent the evening talking about random stuff, and I found myself easing into it. Roman wasn't just some cocky stranger anymore. He was funny, easy to talk to. I didn't even realize how much I was smiling until I caught myself. By the time we sat by the fire later that night, I felt different. We were both leaning back on the couch, the flames crackling, and I wasn't feeling like I had to keep up this wall between us. He didn't try to push anything, just let me be. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something was building between us, something that felt way too good to ignore. Later that night. It was after dinner when it happened. We were both cleaning up in the tiny kitchen, just getting on with it like normal. I reached for a plate at the same time as Roman, and our fingers brushed. I froze, and so did he. For a second, neither of us moved. "Sorry," Roman said first, pulling his hand back, but he didn't sound sorry at all. His voice was different, like he was trying to cover up something else. I just nodded, but my heart was racing, and it took everything I had to keep my cool. "It's fine," I muttered, my voice tighter than it meant to be. But damn, there was something about that touch. It was just a brief moment, but the way my body reacted, it was like I'd been jolted awake. Roman didn't say anything else, but I could feel the shift in the air. We moved around each other in the same kitchen like we were trying to be careful not to make any more accidental contact, but it wasn't the same. The chemistry between us had changed somehow. Later that night, after we'd eaten, we sat back by the fire again. The silence was comfortable, but there was this electric tension now, something I couldn't quite shake. He was sitting a little too close. Every time I looked over at him, I saw that familiar smirk. But it wasn't just playful anymore, it was knowing. The next day. It was the next night when the conversation really started to shift. We were sitting by the fire, like we had every night, but this time, the words felt different. The usual banter wasn't there, and instead there was something a little more real between us. Roman had taken off his jacket, sleeves rolled up, revealing the tattoos on his arms. I hadn't really looked at him like this before, but tonight it hit me. He was built, not just lean like I first thought. "So," he said, leaning forward, "tell me about your life. You don't talk much about what you do outside of marketing." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't know, it's not all that exciting." Roman was staring at me, studying me like he was trying to figure me out. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who just does marketing. You're not the type to sit behind a desk all day." I frowned, not sure how to answer. "I work hard, that's all." He nodded, his green eyes softening for a second. I get it. But there's more to you than that, right? I wasn't sure why, but for some reason his words hit me harder than I expected. I turned my head away, not wanting to show how much they made me think. Roman didn't push, though. He just leaned back, letting the moment pass, but I could tell he was still watching me, and I realized something. He wasn't just being this charming, confident guy to annoy me. He was showing me a side of himself that wasn't so easy. The next morning, we woke up later than usual. The storm was still howling outside, but there was a strange comfort in the chaos. I had gotten used to him being there. I don't know when it happened, but it felt almost normal. Roman had made coffee and set out breakfast like it was something we'd been doing for weeks, and I found myself going along with it. We ate in comfortable silence for a while, and I noticed, for the first time, how much I liked it. Not just the food, though it was actually pretty good, but the fact that it felt easy with him. "So," he said after a while, breaking the silence, "you know you don't have to be all grumpy about this. We're kind of making the best of it, right?" I looked at him, considering his words. He wasn't trying to push me, wasn't forcing anything, but the way he said it, there was something in his tone that made me feel lighter somehow. "I'm not grumpy," I muttered, even though I was. Sure, this was supposed to be a peaceful retreat and it was anything but that. But I wasn't grumpy anymore. Not as much. And that realization made me uneasy. We both stood up, moving around each other. And this time, when our arms brushed, I didn't pull away. Neither of us did. And I didn't want to. Later that evening. It happened so suddenly that I almost didn't realize it was happening until it was too late. We were sitting by the fire again, just like every other night. The storm outside was howling, and the warmth from the flames was almost enough to make me forget how tense things had been between us. Almost. Roman was leaning back in the chair, casually flipping through a book, while I stared into the fire, trying to avoid thinking about how close he was. The silence was comfortable, but the tension was building. Every time I looked over at him, I felt that pull, that undeniable chemistry. He kept teasing me, little things here and there, making me laugh when I didn't want to, calling me out on my bad habits like it was all just a game. "Seriously, you need to lighten up," he said, tossing the book aside with a grin. "You've been way too intense the last few days." "Yeah, well, someone has to be," I said, trying to keep it casual. But I could feel the heat of his gaze on me, the familiar smirk playing at the corner of his mouth. My chest tightened. He shifted in his chair, suddenly closer. The distance between us, which had felt like a chasm just a few days ago, felt like nothing now. "You know," he said, voice low, "we're stuck here together. Might as well enjoy it." I didn't say anything. Instead, I just met his eyes, and for the first time, I didn't look away. Roman leaned in, his breath warm against my face. Without thinking, I leaned forward too, and before I could stop myself, our lips collided. It wasn't gentle, it was fast, urgent, like we were both hungry for something we didn't fully understand. But it was real. When we pulled away, neither of us said a word. We just stared at each other for a second, and the world outside seemed to stop. The next morning, everything felt different. The kiss wasn't mentioned, not by him, not by me. It was like it had never happened. But the air between us was thicker now, charged in a way I couldn't ignore. I tried to pretend everything was fine, tried to go about my morning like it was just another day of being snowed in with some guy I couldn't stand. But I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. We were both quieter than usual, moving around the cabin like we had a shared secret. But this time, there was no tension, no animosity, there was a comfort. Roman passed me a cup of coffee without a word, and I took it, our fingers brushing briefly. It felt like the most natural thing in the world. We spent the rest of the morning in a strange kind of rhythm, like we'd always been doing this. There were no more awkward pauses, no more trying to avoid looking at each other. We just moved together, cooking, cleaning, talking. Even when we weren't saying anything, it was easy. Later, when we were both lounging in the living room, I noticed how casually Roman had moved closer to me. He was sitting on the couch, one leg stretched out, the other bent under him, looking completely relaxed. Without thinking, I kicked off my shoes and pulled my legs up to curl into the same position, and before I knew it, we were sitting there side by side, not touching, but so close that it almost didn't matter. He glanced over at me, and for a second, I thought he might say something, but instead he just smiled, and I smiled back, without even realizing I was doing it. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't forced, it was just easy. Being stuck in the cabin with Roman didn't feel so bad anymore. In fact, I almost didn't want it to end. A few days later. It had been 5 days since we kissed. 5 days of awkward glances, stolen touches, and silence that was louder than anything else. The storm outside still hadn't let up, but I could feel the storm brewing between Roman and me too. It wasn't just the bad weather anymore. It was the fact that we had an expiration date hanging over us, and neither of us knew how to deal with it. I watched him in the kitchen that morning, his back turned to me as he made coffee. I didn't say anything. It was just quiet. Too quiet. The air was thick with things neither of us wanted to say. The cabin was small, too small for this kind of tension, for the weight of what we both knew was coming. Roman broke the silence, his voice calm but with a hint of something I couldn't place. So when the storm clears, what happens? He didn't look at me, but I could feel his gaze on the back of my head. I shrugged, pretending I wasn't affected by the question. Same thing that's been happening. We pack up, head out, go back to our lives. Roman was still quiet, and I could tell he was thinking about something. Maybe the same thing I was. Something about the way he hadn't pushed back against the idea of us separating made my stomach twist. Usually, he'd joke about it, tried to make it sound less serious. But not today. Today there was no teasing, just uncertainty. The silence hung there again, thick and uncomfortable, and I didn't know what was worse. The fact that we were both pretending everything was fine, or the fact that I wasn't sure what I wanted to happen when we left this cabin. A few days later. The last few days had gone by in a blur. We both knew the storm was going to stop soon. I could feel it in the way the air had shifted, the way the winds had calmed down, but it was like we were both holding our breath, not wanting to acknowledge the inevitable. Our time was running out. I sat on the couch, staring out the window at the snow-covered landscape, wishing it would just keep snowing forever. I didn't want to leave, didn't want things to go back to how they were before. Roman was sitting next to me, too close for comfort, but not touching. Not that we needed to touch anymore, we'd crossed that line. So, Roman's voice was low, like he was testing the waters. I didn't turn to look at him. What do you think this is? I mean, when we leave here, is it just nothing, just a memory, or... I felt my chest tighten, my heart picking up speed. He was asking me what I thought, what I felt. I couldn't answer that. I didn't even know what I wanted. I don't know, Roman, I said, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. I guess we'll figure that out when it's over, won't we? Roman didn't say anything after that. We both just sat there in silence, side by side, but miles apart. Neither of us was sure what to do next. The reality of leaving, of walking away from what we'd built here, hung in the air like a weight we couldn't lift. It was funny, I thought, how we could get so close and then feel so far apart all over again. But I wasn't ready to ask the questions that mattered, and I didn't think Roman was either. So we just stayed there, in the quiet, pretending we had all the time in the world, even though we both knew we didn't. 3 days later. It was the night before we were supposed to leave, and the tension between us had reached its breaking point. The storm had finally stopped, the skies clear, but the air between Roman and me was still thick with everything we hadn't said. We were sitting side by side on the couch, the warmth from the fire doing little to ease the coldness that had settled between us. I couldn't stand it anymore. The way we were pretending like nothing was wrong, like everything was fine, it was suffocating. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to keep my cool, but I couldn't. Roman looked over at me, his eyes soft but serious. "You okay?" he asked, like he wasn't already feeling the same pressure, but I could see it in his face. He was just as lost as I was. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. I stared at the floor, trying to find the words. Finally, I just blurted it out. "I don't want this to end." It was like the air had shifted, like all the tension in the room collapsed. Roman's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, we were quiet. Not because we didn't have anything to say, but because we didn't need to. The words had already been said. Roman shifted closer to me, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't want it to end either." There was a pause, a moment where everything hung in the balance, and then, without saying anything more, he reached out, taking my hand in his. We didn't need to explain it. Neither of us had all the answers, but it didn't matter. The relief was overwhelming. We didn't have to leave here empty-handed. We'd figure it out, whatever this was. But for the first time, I didn't feel like I was walking away from something. I felt like I was walking toward something, and I wasn't afraid of it anymore. The next morning. The morning we were leaving felt different. There was no weight in the air, no tension, just a strange sense that everything was somehow right, even though it was so complicated. Roman and I packed our bags side by side, moving in a quiet rhythm like we'd been doing it for years. The cabin was now a mess of empty spaces and folded sheets, and I couldn't help but notice how much more comfortable we'd gotten with each other in the last few days. It felt natural to be close, even if we hadn't quite figured everything else out. I glanced over at him as he zipped up his bag, and he caught my eye. "So, we're really doing this?" His voice was light, but I could hear the underlying question. I nodded, my heart pounding a little. "Yeah, we are." Roman smiled, a little bit of his old, cocky self coming back. "You sure about this? Long distance?" He shrugged, like it was nothing, but I knew he was just as unsure as I was. But we'd both said it, the words that mattered. "I'm sure," I said, the words coming out easier than I expected. "We can figure it out. We don't have to know everything right now." Roman's grin softened, and he stepped closer, like he couldn't help himself. There was that familiar pull between us again, and before I could stop myself, he reached up, cupping my face with his hand, and kissed me. It was soft at first, just a press of lips, but then it deepened, and I felt a rush of warmth spread through me. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a quiet agreement between us. When we pulled away, I was breathless, my chest tight with everything that was unsaid. "Okay," he murmured, voice low and serious. "Then let's take it slow. No pressure, just us figuring it out." I smiled, nodding. I didn't need to know all the answers, but this felt like the right start. It didn't have to be perfect. We didn't need to force anything. As we finished packing, we didn't talk much, but there was a shared understanding between us. The storm outside was gone, and with it, the heaviness that had weighed on me. It wasn't the end. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't sure about, but something I was excited to see where it could go. Roman slung his bag over his shoulder and looked at me, a quiet challenge in his eyes. "You ready for this?" I grinned. "Yeah, let's go." Conclusion. It's been a year since that crazy weekend in the cabin, and honestly, I still can't believe we're here. We went from two strangers bickering over a double-booked cabin to living together. I never thought that long distance could work, but somehow it did. Maybe it wasn't the distance that mattered. It was the way we felt about each other. We made it work, despite the doubts, and now, I'm not sure where the time went. Our first trip together was a mess, but it set the tone for everything that came after. And now, as we plan our next adventure together, I know that whatever the future holds, we'll face it side by side. The end. What's your crazy vacation story? Thanks for watching. Consider subscribing to become a part of our rainbow force and stay wholesome.